He didn't even look back. The door slammed shut behind her, loud enough to echo through the marble hallway. Isabella Vaughn stood there, motionless,
Blind. Alone.
and pregnant. But Alexander Vaughn, one of the most respected judges in the United States, didn't care. At that moment, it didn't matter to him, because all he could see was shame. But wait, here's the shocking part. Just hours before that moment, he had held her hand, spoke softly to her, promised her everything would be okay. So what changed? What made a powerful man suddenly turn cold? What made him send his own wife away without mercy? Nobody knew. Not the press, not the court, not even the people closest to him, because the truth was buried, hidden behind power, pride, and fear. And Isabella? She disappeared that same night. No calls, no trace, no goodbye. People assumed one thing: she didn't survive. And slowly, the world moved on. But years later, inside a packed courtroom, a case that had nothing to do with him would force Alexander Vaughn to hear something. One testimony, one voice, one truth that would destroy everything he thought he knew. Because what he was about to hear was not just a story.
It was a real-life story.
A shocking truth, with an unexpected ending. And when that moment came, he would wish he never closed that door. Alexander Vaughn was a man people respected without question. Not because he demanded it, but because he earned it. Every step he took inside the courtroom was precise, controlled, confident. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't rush decisions. And he never let emotions cloud his judgment. That was what made him different. That was what made him powerful. People said if your case landed in his court, you would get justice. Not influence. Not sympathy. Justice. But there was something people didn't see. Something he never showed. Alexander Vaughn was a man who feared one thing: imperfection. He believed life should be structured,
Clean.
predictable. Anything outside that, he avoided it, controlled it, or removed it. And that mindset followed him everywhere, even into his marriage. Isabella Vaughn wasn't like him. She didn't care about perfection. She cared about people. She laughed easily,
Spoke gently.
and always saw beauty in things others ignored, even after she lost her sight. Yes, Isabella was blind, but strangely, she was the one who saw life more clearly. She moved through their luxurious home with calm confidence, memorizing every step, every corner, every sound. And Alexander? At first he admired that. He protected her, helped her, stood by her, because back then a love was stronger than pride. But slowly, things began to change. Not suddenly, not dramatically, just quietly. Little moments, little shifts, little thoughts he never said out loud. Like when guests came over, and Isabella would accidentally bump into a chair, or when she reached for something and missed. He would smile in front of others, but inside, something tightened, something uncomfortable, something he refused to admit. But she didn't know that those small moments were planting something dangerous in his heart.
Shame.
Not because she was weak, but because he was afraid of how the world saw him. A powerful judge, with a blind wife. He never said it, but he felt it. And feelings, when ignored,
Grow.
There was one thing about Isabella that never changed, though. Her kindness. She always checked on him, always asked about his day, always listened even when he said very little. And every night, she would say the same thing: Alexander, no matter what happens, will be okay. She believed it, fully. But Alexander? He stopped believing. Work became his escape. Long hours, late nights, fewer conversations, more silence. And Isabella noticed.
Of course she did.
She couldn't see, but she could feel distance better than anyone. One night, she reached for his hand, but he pulled away. Not aggressively, not loudly, just enough. That was the moment something shifted. But he didn't explain, and she didn't push, because love sometimes stays quiet, even when it's hurting. Then came the day everything changed. It started like any normal morning. Quiet, peaceful, routine. But something was different. Alexander was tense, restless,
Distracted.
he barely touched his breakfast, barely spoke. And Isabella? She noticed immediately. What's wrong? She asked softly. Nothing, he replied. But it wasn't nothing. It was never nothing, because hidden behind his silence was a truth he didn't know how to face. Something that didn't fit into his perfect world. Something that felt out of control. But wait, here's where things begin to break. Later that day, a call came in. Not just any call. A call that would change everything. Alexander stepped outside to take it, his voice low,
Sharp. Tense.
and when he came back inside, he wasn't the same man. His face was cold, his eyes distant, his mind already made up. And Isabella? She felt it immediately. What happened? She asked. Silence. Then he spoke. 3 words. We need space. Simple.
Cold.
Final. She froze. Not because she didn't understand, but because she understood too well. But she didn't know that this wasn't just distance. This was the beginning of the end. What happened next would destroy everything they built and change both their lives forever. But everything was about to change. Perfect. This is exactly where the story turns from good to addictive cinematic storytelling. The house felt colder that night, not because the temperature changed, but because something inside it had died. Isabella sat quietly on the edge of the bed, her hands resting gently on her stomach.
Still.
Protective, as if she already knew she was the only one left to protect what mattered. Alexander, she called softly. No response, just the sound of his footsteps moving across the room. Distant, detached, like a stranger. You said we need space, she continued. A pause. What does that mean? Silence again. Then finally, it means this isn't working.
His voice was calm. Too calm.
The kind of calm that doesn't come from peace, but from decision. And that was what hurt the most. Not anger, not shouting, but certainty. Isabella swallowed. Her fingers tightened slightly against her dress. Is it because of me? She asked. He didn't answer immediately. And that silence? It said everything. But she didn't know that Alexander had already convinced himself of something else. Something easier to accept. Something that didn't make him feel weak. This life, he finally said, it's not what I planned. There it was. Not love. Not marriage. Not family. A plan. And she didn't fit into it anymore. Tears slowly formed in Isabella's eyes. But they didn't fall. Because deep down, she was still hoping this wasn't real. Alexander. Her voice trembled slightly. I'm pregnant. The words hung in the air.
Heavy.
Unavoidable. Final. For a moment, everything stopped. Even him. His jaw tightened. His expression hardened. And instead of warmth, instead of shock, instead of responsibility, what surfaced was something darker. Pressure.
Fear.
Loss of control. How far? He asked. Not are you okay? Not are we okay? Just. How far? 8 weeks. Her voice was barely above a whisper. And then, he turned away. That was the moment. The exact moment everything broke. Because instead of stepping closer, he stepped back. And that was when she realized. She was already alone. Hours passed. No more conversation. No comfort. No explanation. Just distance growing thicker with every second. Until finally, he walked to the door, opened it, and said the words that would echo in her life forever. You should leave. No emotion. No hesitation. Just finality. Isabella didn't move. Not immediately. Because sometimes, the body refuses to accept what the heart already understands. Tonight, she asked softly. Yes. That one word? It ended everything. She packed slowly, carefully, not because she had much, but because every movement felt like goodbye. She didn't rush, because part of her still believed he might stop her.
Say something.
Do something. Anything. But he didn't. He stood there, watching, silent, cold,
distant.
until finally, she reached the door. The same door that once welcomed her, protected her, held her life.
She paused, turned slightly.
Alexander, she said, we'll be okay. The same words she always told him, but this time, they sounded different. Not hopeful, not certain, just broken. He didn't respond. And then, the door slammed shut. And just like that, Isabella Vaughn disappeared. The world didn't stop for her. It never does. Not for pain. Not for loss. Not for people who disappear quietly. The first night was the hardest. No home. No direction. No one waiting. Just silence. And uncertainty. But Isabella didn't panic. Because when you've already lost everything, fear loses its power. She moved carefully through the streets, using memory, using sound, using instinct, until eventually, she found a small shelter. Not comfortable, not safe, but enough. Enough to survive. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and survival became routine. She learned quickly, adapted faster, counted steps, recognized voices, memorized patterns, and protected her growing child with everything she had, because now, she wasn't living for herself anymore. But here's the twist. Isabella didn't break. She transformed. A volunteer at the shelter noticed her. The way she spoke, the way she listened, the way she understood people. And one day, they asked her a simple question. Have you ever thought about helping others? Isabella smiled softly. I already do. That was how it started. Small conversations, then guidance, then support. People began to trust her, not because she could see them, but because she understood them. Years passed, and Isabella became something no one expected. Not a victim, not a forgotten woman, but a voice, a powerful one. She began working with vulnerable individuals, helping victims, listening to stories no one else wanted to hear, standing beside people who had no one. And her child?
A boy. Strong, calm, kind.
Everything his father never took the time to understand. She never spoke about Alexander. Not once. Not out of anger, but out of closure. Because some chapters don't need revisiting. But fate wasn't finished yet. It happened on a normal day. Or, at least, it started that way. The courtroom was packed. A high-profile case. Media everywhere. Tension thick in the air. And at the center of it all, Judge Alexander Vaughn. Still respected. Still powerful. Still in control. Or so it seemed. Call the next witness, he said. Firm. Authoritative. Unshaken. And then, a voice responded.
Calm.
Familiar. Unforgettable. Isabella Vaughn. Time stopped. His pen slipped from his fingers. A sound so small, but loud enough in his world.
No, it couldn't be.
But then she stepped forward, guided gently.
Confident. Composed.
Stronger than he remembered. And beside her, a young boy. Alexander's breath caught, because something inside him already knew. But the real shock was not seeing her. It was hearing her. Because the woman he abandoned was now standing in his courtroom as a key witness. And the story she was about to tell would expose everything and destroy him. Say less, we're going full cinematic payoff now. I'll deliver this with deep emotional weight, strong courtroom tension, clean pacing, high retention, and a powerful, unforgettable ending. The courtroom was silent, not the normal kind of silence, not the respectful, controlled quiet that usually filled Alexander Vaughn's courtroom. This was different, heavy, unstable, like something invisible had just shifted in the air. Isabella stood at the witness stand.
Calm. Still.
Unshaken. Her posture straight. Her presence undeniable. And yet, she never looked at him. Not once. State your name for the record, the attorney said. Her voice came out steady.
Clear.
Powerful. Isabella Vaughn. A ripple moved through the courtroom. Whispers, confusion, recognition, because that name was not just any name. It was his name. Alexander's grip tightened around the edge of his desk. His knuckles turned pale, but his face, still controlled, still disciplined. Years of training wouldn't let him break. Not here.
Not now.
Mrs. Vaughn, the attorney continued, can you tell the court your connection to this case? A pause. Not hesitation. Control. Then, yes. She took a breath, and when she spoke again, it wasn't just testimony, it was truth. I work with victims of domestic abandonment and emotional neglect. Her words were calm, but they cut deep. 3 years ago, I began assisting individuals who were left without support, without resources, and without justice. Alexander's heartbeat slowed, then sped up again, because something about the way she spoke was too precise, too intentional. But what makes your testimony important today? Silence. Then, because I was one of them. The courtroom froze. Not dramatic, not exaggerated, just frozen. Alexander blinked. Once.
Twice.
As if his mind was trying to reject what his ears had just heard. I was abandoned, Isabella continued, without warning, without protection, and without support. Her hand slowly rested on the edge of the stand, grounded.
Certain.
I was pregnant. A quiet gasp echoed from somewhere in the room. And I was blind. This time, no one moved. Because now, this wasn't just testimony. This was exposure. Alexander's chest tightened. His breathing became uneven. But still, he said nothing. Can you tell the court what happened after that? The attorney asked. And that was when everything changed. After I was asked to leave my home,
She paused.
not for emotion, but for weight. I spent my first night on the street. The words were simple, but the impact? Devastating. No family, no money, no direction. Her voice remained steady.
But now.
Every word carried something deeper. But I survived. And there it was.
Strength. Power.
Transformation. I learned to rebuild my life from nothing. She continued, I learned how to navigate a world that had already decided I didn't matter. Alexander swallowed hard.
His throat dry.
His thoughts losing structure. And eventually, she said softly, I realized something. The courtroom leaned in. Even the judge inside him couldn't hold control anymore. The person who abandoned me, she continued, was not powerful. A pause. He was afraid. That landed. Not like a statement, but like a verdict. And for the first time, Alexander felt something crack. Because she wasn't shouting. She wasn't accusing. She wasn't even angry. She was telling the truth. And fear, Isabella added, when hidden behind authority. Her head tilted slightly. Can destroy lives. Silence. Then, the final blow. My son, she said, was born 2 weeks after that night. Alexander's heart stopped. He grew up without a father. The words hit harder than anything before. But he did not grow up without love. And then, for the first time since she entered the room, Isabella turned her head. Not toward the audience. Not toward the attorney.
Toward him. Directly.
Not with her eyes, but with her presence. And somehow, it felt like she could see everything. Because I chose not to let someone else's fear, she said quietly, define our future. Alexander's control shattered. His hand trembled. His breathing broke. And for the first time in years, Judge Alexander Vaughn had no authority over the moment. Because this was no longer a courtroom.
It was consequence.
The silence that followed was louder than anything that came before it. No objections. No interruptions. No movement. Just truth, settling into every corner of the room. Alexander sat frozen, not as a judge, not as a powerful man, but as something far more exposed. A man who had just heard his own past, spoken out loud, without protection, without control.
He tried to speak.
But no words came out, because for the first time, there was nothing left to hide behind. The courtroom wasn't looking at Isabella anymore. They were looking at him. And they understood.
Not fully.
But enough. Enough to see the shift. Because power had just changed hands. Not through force, not through status, but through truth. The case itself, almost forgotten. Because what mattered now was something deeper. The recognition that justice is not just about law. It's about accountability. And in that moment, Alexander Vaughn faced something he had avoided his entire life. Imperfection. Not in others. In himself. He slowly lowered his gaze. Not out of defeat, but out of realization. And Isabella?
She didn't wait.
She didn't linger. She didn't need closure from him. Because she had already found it, within herself. She stepped down from the stand. Her movements calm,
Certain.
complete. And as she walked toward the exit, the young boy followed beside her.
Confident.
Strong. Unafraid. Alexander looked at him. And in that single moment, he saw everything he had lost.
Not because it was taken from him.
But because he let it go. And this time, there was no fixing it. No reversal. No second chance waiting at the door. Because some decisions don't come back. The courtroom doors opened. Then closed. And just like years ago, she walked out of his life. But this time, she didn't leave broken. She left powerful. Some people don't lose love because it wasn't real. They lose it because they didn't value it when it was. And the scariest part? By the time they finally understand its worth, it's no longer theirs to keep.